Good morning, everyone. Thank you all for joining us. Mary and Martina, I just want to make sure before we start that we can hear you again. Mary and Martina, can you hear me?
Hi, Jessica. Yes, we can hear you well. Sorry, we had a little problems to click on it, but it's fine.
Okay, I just wanted to test before we start.
Jessica, just one question. Are we the presenter already, or?
Yes, you are. You are. So you can take over as presenter?
Okay.
Yes. Okay, great. So good morning, everyone. Thank you all for joining us. A few housekeeping issues before we start the webinar and before I introduce our presenters. For those of you who have joined and cannot hear or are having some trouble, there are a few things you can do to try to remedy that. First is logging in and out of the call. So essentially hanging up and then logging back in to the link. And if that doesn't work, kindly restart your computer after installing the Skype for Business software. That usually resolves any of the problems that you may have. And for optimal audio, it is highly recommended that you use headphones. Also, kindly ensure that your microphone is on mute, especially while the presenters are delivering their presentations and while anyone else is speaking. And you can do that by kindly right-clicking on the mic icon next to your name and clicking mute or unmute. That helps us to ensure we have a smooth webinar. Also, for those of you who are joining us, please let us know if you haven't already, where you're calling in from, which organization you work for, and if there's a group of people with you, please let us know the number in that group. You can always type in any questions during the presentations, whether they're regarding logistics or the content of the presentations, and we will address them as soon as we can. And the questions regarding the presentations we will have specific time periods for, but if something strikes you in the moment, feel free to type that question in and we will return to it during the Q&A sessions. So without further ado, again, we'd like to thank you for joining us during what is a very busy week with the high-level meeting here at on HIV and AIDS at the United Nations in New York. So it is quite a full week for the global community working on HIV and AIDS. And so we thank you for taking the time out to join us this morning. And today's presentations will focus on the pediatric HIV modeling and estimates and the changes that have occurred in 2016. So the first presentation will be an overview on improving global estimates, the process and the milestones, setting the stage for our webinar, and that will be delivered by Martina Penazzato, who is the pediatric advisor for the HIV department at the World Health Organization in Geneva. And we are very lucky to have her with us today. And the second presentation will focus more on the estimation methods used this year and really hone in on the changes that are specific to pediatric HIV that have occurred this year and have affected the data. So, and that presentation will be delivered by Mary Mahey, who is the Division Chief of Strategic Information and Monitoring for UNAIDS. And we are honored to have her with us as well. So we will have the first presentation and then accept questions regarding the first presentation and then move on to the second presentation and have a Q&A session following that as well. Okay. Without further ado, I'll turn it over to Martina Pinizzato of WHO to give the first presentation. Thank you so much, Martina, for being with us today.
Thank you very much, Jessica, for the opportunity to contribute, and good morning or good afternoon, everyone. And I'm very happy to have the opportunity really to talk a little bit more about this piece of work that has been developed over the past 2 years. And so my job is really to give you a short overview of what's been done and what and the different steps that we took leading to coming up with new estimates. I think it's important to recognize that this work is building on existing and previous work that the UNAIDS reference group has done over time. And so this is just a piece of the puzzle, and I think it just recognizes how we've attempted to revamp the discussion and technical conversation that contributes to improving and adjusting the spectrum model over time. So when did we start this dialogue? We started this dialogue back in 2013, and the reason for that, it was that we decided to organize a pediatric ARV drug optimization meeting that had the focus on really developing the right drugs and the right formulation for children. And in order to do that and to inform exactly the next steps to be taken, we really needed to have a sense of what's the size of the market and what's the population that we're trying to serve. And so as part of that, Mary and I and others have really tried to put together some preparatory work that could inform that dialogue, and we did a scenario exercise that had the objective to estimate the number of children living with HIV by 2020, but also to understand better the size and the age of the population on a yearly basis, and look at those that would have been in need of ART by 2020. And I think it's important to remember that back then in 2013, the recommendation for starting children on ART was still to treat all less than 5 and had a CD4-based approach for those children that were older than 5. So we really needed to also capture that element and explore the size and the age of the pediatric population that was in need of ART. So in order to do that, we tried to come up with a few scenarios that would reflect the scale-up happening in countries, and we tried to consider different approaches, as assuming that no improvement was going to be made in the future, that some improvement with the similar trend was going to happen by 2020, and then a rapid scale-up was possible in countries, and that's what you see in those 3 scenarios: maximum, likely, and stable. I won't go into the details of that, but this is just to say that's what we tried to explore. And what we came up with, it was an estimate number of children in need and living with HIV and then in need of ART that I won't show right now. But I think that the key message we had out of this exercise, it was that despite all the assumptions that were attached to the different scenarios, we didn't necessarily see a huge difference in the total number of children with HIV. And so out of that, we felt that perhaps spectrum wasn't as sensitive as we would have liked to the changes that would then result into different numbers for children living with HIV. And so we felt that we needed to do a little bit of extra work to have more accurate estimates of the number of children living with HIV moving forward. So basically what we did, it was to convene a couple of technical consultations that happened in 2014 and then in 2015. So the group of people that contributed to this discussion was largely represented by key members of the UNAIDS reference group, And so it was very clearly attached to the ongoing work in refining and adjusting spectrum over time. But also we had some epidemiologists, modelers, and additional members that joined that technical discussion to be able to capture a lot of the knowledge that we have around natural history and also the programmatic experience that countries were observing and documenting in countries. So the first meeting gave us the opportunity to really make a step back and ask ourselves whether what we had at that point was the right modeling approach. And so we looked at a structure that would reflect some of the natural history that we know on HIV in children, and then we considered the parameters that would inform that structure, and also the potential data sources that one would need to consider. And so as part of our discussion, we really asked ourselves whether the modeling structure that we were looking at was reflecting the natural history, but also the programmatic reality, and whether we were getting the right balance between what we wanted and what was feasible in terms of data collection in countries as well. And lastly, we did ask ourselves, can we how does that fit with what's already available in Spectrum? And I think that the discussion went on really considering some of the parameters, and then whether these parameters needed to be stratified, for example, by age, and how many strata for the parameters were needed. And also we tried to discuss whether these parameters were likely to change over time, because we were obviously trying to look at the future rather than the present. And also we discussed obviously some of the details on the values to attach to these parameters. And the final agreement after that was really that what we needed is that probably we needed to build on Spectrum, because Spectrum was already an established mechanism and an established model that had been functioning for a long time and that countries rely on. And so it was easier for us to really make sure that potential adjustments were included in Spectrum rather than starting a new model. And so if we look at some of the key drivers that leads to calculating and estimating the number of children living with HIV, I think it's important to recognize there are two elements. One is new infection, the number of new infections, and the other aspects, it's about the survival. So with regards to new infections, I think the conversation really focuses on some of the potential differences between fertility in HIV-infected women and the changing pattern over time in different epidemic settings. And that's something that we discuss a lot. We also had some discussion around the breastfeeding differences between HIV-infected women and general population, and consider some of the elements that may affect the effectiveness of PMTCT interventions, such as HIV drug resistance selection, adherence, and that would really have an impact on transmission. So on the survival component, we did obviously look at the identification and initiation of ART by age, and recognizing that was a critical point that needed to be considered moving forward. And we also discussed survival of ART and on ART based on age and when treatment had been started. Again, we consider those elements that would affect effectiveness of treatment, and so adherence is something that we certainly brought up, and the issue of really considering treatment sequencing and a potential for a failure of first-line treatment and after ART initiation. So out of that first meeting, we basically identified 3 key areas. The first one being the elements that needed to be adjusted in Spectrum that were already possible at that point. Then we recognized there was a group of information of data that would need to be gathered, that were recognized to be relevant and important, but for which reliable data wasn't necessarily available there, either for to make it a data as data input or to make it at default parameters. And lastly, we knew that there were some elements that could be important for the model, but that we decided to first explore either within Spectrum or in other models to understand whether they would have an impact or not, and then subsequently consider them in future revision of Spectrum. We then went on, some of these changes were implemented, but then we met again the following year, because meantime some key changes had happened, and I think it's very clear that the scale up of B+ was very, very good, and that's something that we didn't necessarily expect. And also we knew what came up in 2015 is the revision of the 2015 guidelines that will be available in the public domain this week. And as you all know, all children are now recommended to be started on ART, irrespective of their clinical and immunological condition. And so that obviously put emphasis on the larger number of children that will now require ART. We also acknowledged really adolescents as a more discrete population that requires specific service delivery models, and really emphasized the need of having better data for adolescents as well in order to inform programming. So there's obviously a number of other elements that the guidelines included that may have an impact on some of the numbers that we're talking about, and I'm not going to go into the details of that, but I want to flag that, for example, the use of enhanced prophylaxis in high-risk babies would obviously potentially reduce further transmission, but we also know that more permissive approach to breastfeeding with a longer breastfeeding period may have an important impact on what we're trying to do here as well. So we met, as I said, again in 2015, and again the objectives were still the same: to measure progress and improve forecasting and program planning, because for those of you that particularly are working in countries, these numbers are very important to really inform what you do on a daily basis. So we decided to basically relook at what we had done by that point and to really identify new steps forward to further improve and adjust the estimates. So this is just, again, I'm not going to go into the detail, but this is just a flag that obviously some of the adjustments and data collection had happened between 2014 to 2015, and then there are some elements that still remain to be addressed, at least that in October 2015 remain to be addressed. And we will hear more from Mary in terms of what actual changes have happened since then to the Spectrum model. So I just want to conclude with the last slide to just really highlight where would you like to go from here. And I think it's in the thinking and discussion that we've had so far, it's clear how the Spectrum might need to capture better some of the programmatic reality in terms of retention and adherence that obviously would affect some key parameters that are included in the model. Also, as we move forward with scaling up programs, and for example, we succeed in starting treatment in people living with HIV, we may need a more granular approach to, for example, to modeling what's the natural history of but also what's the sort of the history of those that are on ART, and that will need to be captured by Spectrum, particularly in terms of survival. And I think that it's important to recognize that how all of this has a strong link to some of the work that informed forecasting, and we did discuss this in the last meeting and recognize that we may be able to develop a forecasting module that potentially has some more granular structure that would enable a more detailed and more nuanced estimation of the need for ART in a given country. We obviously recognize that a lot of this needs to be gathered and by a number of different either research networks or through programs. And so what we, I think, recognize is it will be important to make sure that there are resources to support that piece of work, which we hope is going to move forward, and that we're going to really be able to have a sort of periodic catch-up to be able to adapt and introduce any new elements that would be required in the future. So we're hoping to gather again with the same group of people in the fall in 2016 around the UNAIDS reference group meeting, and so this stream of work hopefully will continue and will contribute to improving pediatric estimates over time. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Martina, for the overview of the process of revising the pediatric estimates and the spectrum model. We'll stop now to take some questions from the audience. If there are any questions, kindly type them in or feel free to unmute your mic and ask the question. So this is a question from Malawi regarding accessing the new estimates. I cannot seem to find the latest numbers on the UNAIDS site. So this is a question from one of our participants in Malawi, and I believe Mary will speak to that in the next presentation, but if you want to respond now, Mary and Martina.
Hi, yeah, so at my last slide will show that the data will be available tomorrow on our website. There's actually an embargo until tomorrow when some of the results are being presented.
Okay, great. So the next question is, are you able to use population data from large test and treat trials such as SEARCH in Kenya to get more real data on pediatric HIV prevalence?
So I'll take that one.
Yeah, I wonder, Jessica, because some of these questions, rightly so, are about some of the details of the model. So shall we hear from Mary first and then go back to these really useful questions?
Okay, great. Yes, we've noted all of your questions. We've received 2 more, and we'll note them and we'll return to them after Mary presents. So I'll turn it over to Mary to present a much more detailed presentation on the specific changes to the pediatric HIV estimates for 2016.
Yeah, thanks, Jessica. And yeah, these are good questions coming in, and I hope I can respond to them either during the presentation or at the end. My last slide is really talking about where you can get more data from, because I think that's an important question for people. And before I start, I just have to give a little explanation. So when we originally talked about making this presentation, we assumed the data would be out kind of about 3 or 4 days ago. And then last week, the release of the data was changed based on a change to the timing of the sessions at the high-level meeting in New York. And so now the session, the data actually on the kind of the child estimates and the PMT-CT estimates will be actually coming out tomorrow. And so I'm asking all of you that see this presentation and hear this presentation to recognize that the data that I'm showing you are actually embargoed until tomorrow at any time during the day. So just so you realize that, I don't present any actual numbers. I'm just showing you images of what you can expect, because I think it's absolutely important. And then to say thanks to the organizers, it's very important for everyone to understand what changed in the models and whether it's a change in the model or a drastic increase in child coverage or drastic decrease in the number of children living with HIV. So it's an important message to get across, and hopefully I'll do so during this presentation. Sorry. So first of all, just a quick background slide, one slide just to let you know where do these estimates come from. And so what UNAIDS does is every year we support countries with partners to create spectrum files that come up with the estimate of the number of people living with HIV, children living with HIV, ART coverage, etc. The software, the development of that software is really guided by the UNAIDS reference group on modeling estimates and projections, which Martina referenced before. that group is a kind of, it's a moving cohort of experts that help us advise on the models as the topic comes up. So when we're talking about anything related to pediatric estimates, we reach out to the people who have the best knowledge around pediatrics and pull them into the reference group. Or when we're looking at incidence measures, we reach out to people who know kind of laboratory assays, etc. So it's a really moving group of people, but making sure we get the best advice all the time. But the point is that then every year as we update that software, the estimates change. And that happens from one year to the next. So these models are improved every year, but in addition, sorry, were you able to see my slide?
We were able to see it. It's just that for you to change the slides, you take over as presenter.
Okay, sorry. So now we're ready to go. This is my second slide, just to say. Thanks. All right, so just going back, so the models change every year. That's due to two reasons. One is that the models are improved every year, but in addition, the country teams enter additional data. For example, how many women were reached with PMT-CT, how many, with ARVs, how many children were reached with ARVs, how many children's got cotrimoxazole. In addition, they put in surveillance data. So if they have a new household survey, or if they have a new A and C sentinel surveillance data, they put those data in. But just recognize, so when we update our estimates, we don't just create 2015 estimates, but we update the historical data as well, all the way back to 1970, because our model now is improved and better, and so we have a better understanding of the epidemic overall. So I won't spend much time on this slide, but just to say that the information going into Spectrum includes demographic data coming from the World Population Prospects 2015, the program statistics on ART and women receiving PMT-CT, as well as cotrimoxazole and some information on breastfeeding. We also take into account epidemic patterns based on existing existing research studies that are out there. And then there's the surveillance and survey data that are really critical to understanding what prevalence trends have been over time. And those data, including the ART data, are used to translate into incidence trends over time. That data is then put into the model, and the calculations are done to calculate mother-to-child transmission, as well as into the child and adult kind of survival or progression models. The results that we get out of that is number of HIV-positive people, number of people living with HIV, new infections, AIDS deaths. We also used to use much more often the eligibility for treatment, as well as the need for PMT-CT, so important pieces of information. So if we break down the data then to look a little bit more about children, if we look at the number of new child infections comes from a few additional assumptions. So we already have that demographic data. That includes total fertility rate. It also includes the age distribution of that fertility, as well as number of women 15 to 49. That data, along with the surveillance data, as well as information on fertility among HIV-positive women versus HIV-negative women, is all combined together to come up with the number of births to HIV-positive women. So that's the number of children who are being exposed to HIV. We put in then the program statistics of the number of women who are reached with ARVs and the prophylaxis or treatment, and we recognize that there's different effectiveness of whether a woman is receiving ART before she becomes pregnant or during that pregnancy, and what that regimen includes, and how long she's breastfeeding as well. So the program's data on PMT-CT, as well as the breastfeeding patterns, allows us to calculate the total number of new child infections. So this, I'm sorry about this slide, but I was trying to capture it all into one slide, and it's a bit busy. But what happens is once we have new child infections in the software, we then distribute those new infections across the different CD4 percentages. And so in the model, we use CD4% for children under 5. And once they become 5, we transfer those children into CD4 count and use the same sort of model as adults. But we recognize that when a child seroconverts, they will have different level of CD4. And so you can see that first graphic all the way on the left, the first figure shows what that distribution looks like based on when it's, what CD4 they might be at infection. Then the next kind of column there, if we look at 2A and 2B, 2A shows what that child progression looks like among the 0 to 4-year-olds when we're still using CD4%. And the boxes on the left-hand side show you that children can move from one CD4 level down to another, CD4% level, or CD4 category, I'll say, down to the next one, or they could go off to the left and actually die. Or they go to the right where they age out and become, they go into the CD4 count category, and then they're processed through that possibility. If you go down to 2B, then you see what it looks like for children 5 to 14. And again, if they're in the 2B, I've just showed a little bit more detail saying, in addition to having these children progress through CD4 categories, they can also progress to becoming on ART, and then they can either die while they're on ART, or they can, so they're not on ART and they either go to ART, and from ART they can either die or stay on ART. In the not on ART, they can either progress down to lower CD4 levels, or they can die. And just to say very clearly that among the children 0 to 4, you also have the possibility of being on ART, but I just haven't put that into the diagram as it would get very complicated. So once we progress the children through their different probabilities of moving between CD4 categories, we also have the option to have them die. And so where do we get that data on whether they die or not? The top right diagram shows the patterns of time. Sorry, I've just written that wrong. I'm sorry. Off ART survival, it's patterns of survival. Oh, no, that's right. Patterns of survival by timing of infection and CD4 category. And so what you can see is those children who are infected, it's quite small there, those children who are infected during the pregnancy are the most likely to die. Those children who are infected further away from the delivery, so whether it's 0 to 6 months after delivery, or 6 to 12, or 12 plus, which is the highest line, are less likely to die. So that's just a survival curve among children who are becoming infected with HIV. So that's children who are off ART, and just shows that the model will take into account when the child was infected to determine when they actually die. The bottom right graph shows the survival among children who are on ART. And that data is actually coming from the IDEA consortium, which is a consortium of ART providers who share their data on the patients, and it's a global consortium, and so it gives us quite a lot of data, and we use it for a number of our assumptions in the model. But what it shows there is that, that children of different age groups by sex will also survive different times based on their CD4 category. And so what you see in the on the y-axis is their probability of surviving, and on the x-axis is for different CD4 levels. And you can see that for the lower CD4% level, this is for children or for different age groups, but the children all under age 5, you can see that the mortality will increase as they get to older age groups. Sorry, let me say that again. The mortality of children will increase as they get to lower CD4 percentage, as you expect. And again, that data comes from the IDEA consortium. So the result of all those models, let's just think this through. So we've presented how the model works, but now what I want to talk a little bit more about is how the results look compared to last year. And I'm going to go through the changes that we actually made in the model. What I just explained to you is like, how does it all work? And then I'll explain what those changes are. So first of all, I just want to say that there's a slight decrease in the number of new infections, and the blue lines on these graphs here are our 2016 estimates. The black line is our previous 2015 estimates. The gray lines around it are uncertainty bounds around those estimates. As you can see, the new infections have declined historically, or are slightly lower historically, while the children living with HIV, the second graph on the right there, is significantly lower. And a lot of that is due to the addition of the lower new infections over time. In addition, you see that AIDS deaths is slightly lower in the new models. So where does this come from? Why are these differences occurring? And so this leads back to what Martina was presenting on, where we have a reference group meeting in October of 2015, where we looked at what are some of the recommendations, some of the things we can change actually in the model to improve the estimates. The first change that I want to mention was we commissioned a research to kind of analysis to go out and look at what's the current understanding around mother-to-child transmission probabilities. We had done this research in 2012 and come up with a set of probabilities, but we thought maybe there was more data out there that could help improve our understanding. The second objective was to go and look at the IDEA data on the distribution of children starting ART. And previously, we had assumed that the distribution of children starting on ART reflected when children became eligible for ART. And so there wasn't any sense of children were actually delayed in starting on ART until they got older. And we thought this might be a problem as well. The third item that came out of the 2015 meeting was to look at the dropout rate of women on ART during the breastfeeding period to understand whether there could have been new infections taking place during the breastfeeding that we weren't actually capturing as women stopped taking ART. So I'll walk through each of these three items. So firstly, the updated transmission probabilities. So if you look at the items that are highlighted in red, the gray is our previous assumptions on the probability of transmitting from the mother to the child. The top graph is the peripartum transmission, the bottom graph is the postpartum transmission. The postpartum note is per month, so it's a percentage per month of breastfeeding. So if a woman breastfeeds for 12 months, she'll have that percentage times 12. But the really important things to note here is the drop in the transmission probability among incident infections. It's almost a 30% drop, and that was a really important change. In addition, there were some other smaller changes, for example, in single dose nevirapine, which many women were on in the early part of the epidemic. In addition, I'm just trying to move this. In addition, okay, I can't see. Sorry, I can't see that. But the transmission among women who started ARVs, thank you, before the pregnancy was considerably lower during the per month transmission probability. So in the next few slides, I'm just showing if we had made the changes to the model but not changed any of the country programmatic data. So what these test results show us is really just the changes to the model and not the updated data that the countries have put in. This would be the difference. And the first thing to note here is that our test results suggest that there's many fewer new child infections over the past 15 years based on the new model. As a result of that, the children living with HIV is considerably lower as well. And this is the same thing that I showed you as we started talking through this presentation. But this is, again, the test results, just showing the results of the model and not the country input. So we know already that there's a considerably lower number of children living with HIV based on our new assumptions. The second item that we looked at, recommendation that came out of the pediatrics meeting, was to look at the distribution of children starting on ART. And we always knew we had that wrong, but we didn't have very good data to tell us what that distribution looked like. And we struggled to get data from countries to get the number starting at each age group on ART. So the IDEA consortium was able to provide us this distribution of children starting on ART for 3 regions. They provided the data by single year age group. So even though I've shown it here lumped together just for ease of presentation, we have this data for every single age group, 0 through 14. In addition, they provided it for 3 different regions, so for Asia, Africa, and for Latin America. We then also were able to get data from Tanzania and South Africa that were program data to look at whether the IDEA data could possibly be different. You know, if the children who are going to those ART sites that are in this network are somehow different. And that's what you see in the bottom right-hand graphic there. You can see the data in black from South Africa, in gray from Tanzania, and in blue from the IDEA consortium, which is what's now incorporated into our model. And as you can see, the IDEA consortium comes nicely in between the South African and the Tanzanian data, at least in 2012. You can also see in that left-hand graphic the median age at ART initiation. And what's really important to note here is that data show that there has been a decline with children starting on ART at younger years. And so it's really important that in the model we take this into consideration, that we recognize that there's changes over time in when children are starting. And so the IDEA consortium was able to provide us with trends from 2002 or 2004 until today, which is very useful, and we'll continue to try to incorporate that data into our models until countries are actually able to provide that for us. But just last point, the impact of this means that there's higher mortality historically, as children are likely to have started on ART later than what we predicted in the previous model. But so that seems funny, given that I just presented earlier that there's fewer AIDS deaths and not more AIDS deaths. But when you translate this into a case fatality rate, so that means the number of AIDS deaths per HIV positive population, you can see that case fatality rate is about 10 to 12% higher historically. And so as a result, we actually did have more mortality among children living with HIV that's hidden by the fact that we're using numbers on that first graph on the left. So the last point that I want to say, that I just want to bring up, although we didn't change something, is that in the reference group discussion, we realized that we do need to understand what's happening during the breastfeeding period among women. If they're stopping to take ART, their increased probability of transmission is not necessarily being captured. So we've talked to the IATT M&E working group to say, can you identify potential countries with data on dropout rates? I think we had some from Malawi. We were talking about maybe Rwanda, but if anyone on this phone or the webinar has data, please do send it to us. We're eager to get that and somehow incorporate, even if it's default estimates, into the current model. That would be useful. The other idea that's come up more recently is to look at the IDEA data and see if they have information on pregnant women, to try to pull that in as well and drop out. So no change was made based on this third item, but we recognize that it might result in underestimating the number of new child infections. So just to comment too, that in the test results, there's no real change in mothers needing PMTCD. That stayed very stable over the past few years. So that's not a cause of the change that we're seeing. So just another few slides here, 4 more slides on the new 2016 results. And as I mentioned before, these are embargoed until 8th of June, till tomorrow. I'm just showing images and not numbers so that you don't write them down and go running to the press or something with them. We'll give you the numbers tomorrow. But first of all, there has been a significant decline in new child infections. So we've known this from before, but it's definitely still there in our new estimates. The whole curve is brought down slightly. It's not quite as high as we thought in the past, but significantly lower numbers than we had at the beginning of the century. In addition, the big news and important news is that the child ART coverage that we've seen historically in the blue lines there versus the gray lines, which is adult coverage, is much closer to adult coverage than we had thought before. In fact, it's slightly higher among children than it is among adults. And this, I think a lot of people struggle with this slide and say, but how is this possible? We've always heard that the children aren't getting the treatment, but yet we've heard from a lot of countries and a lot of program implementers that we just can't find these children that are being estimated through the Spectrum software. So is the Spectrum software correct? And so I think this change that we're seeing now in our estimates is validated to some extent by a number of countries. So we're interested in seeing how this moves forward, but we think that this is correct at this point, that the coverage is actually quite or much more similar to the adults than what we had previously thought. Finally, I just want to make a point about the AIDS deaths among children. And what we can see here is that the largest majority of AIDS deaths are among children 0 to 4, and that trend line among those children has been dropping very steeply over the past few years. In addition, you can see the 5 to 9-year-olds have been declining since around 2008 or so, 2007. 10 to 14-year-olds are just starting to decline, and again, the 15 to 19-year-olds are still increasing slightly. A lot of this has to do with kind of the wave of children who were infected and the age of that wave as they're going through. So a lot of it has to do with kind of the success of the PMT-CT program. So this is just a final point about the AIDS deaths among children. Last slide here is just to say where's the additional information, because I've kind of left you here without any concrete numbers to take with you. So tomorrow they'll launch the progress report on the global plan, and that will include data just around the 21 priority countries for the global plan. As in previous years, India has not provided us with the estimates we need, and thus we don't include India in this analysis. So it's just the 21 countries that are in sub-Saharan Africa and prioritized by the global plan. But that's not to say we don't have data for all countries, and those country-specific data can be found tomorrow on the AIDS Info website. In addition, in the bottom right corner, you see that we did put out a document that was called an AIDS update, which was released about a week ago. And that report is available on our website. In addition, we'll have a global report that will come out in early July to be released at the Durban conference that will have much more analysis as well as regional data and country data. So that's it from my side, and I'm available for questions as needed.
Hi, thank you so much, Mary, for your very thorough overview of the changes made to the model. And we'll open it up for questions. I will return back to the question that was posted earlier. Give me a second as I find it. It was about using population data from the large test and treat trials such as SEARCH in Kenya to get more real data on pediatric prevalence. So I think you've talked about it in a more broader context, but specifically in reference to large test and treat trials. Is that considered when you revise the model and the estimates?
So we pull in quite a bit of data from other sources on prevalence, but we have not pulled in the Kenya SEARCH estimates. And so I think that's an interesting proposal, and we'd be glad to be looking into a number of those test and treat analyses for the pediatric prevalence. It wasn't one that I necessarily thought of off the top of my mind when we're looking for data. We often go to the big household surveys and their prevalence data, and unfortunately the uncertainty bounds around those, or confidence intervals actually, are so wide that it makes it hard to interpret anything from those. But I agree that the SEARCH study would be a good option to go look for. Thanks.
Thank you. And the next question is, did you change any assumptions in the model about cotrimoxazole?
No, the cotrimoxazole assumptions are the same. I think they have about saying this off the top of my head, it's about a 30% reduction in mortality among children who are receiving cotrimoxazole along with ART. So there is a pretty strong assumption among children who are receiving cotrimoxazole.
And just to add on that, we did discuss that in detail, because over the past 3 years, the new data from our CTs came up in addressing really the impact that cotrimoxazole has in reducing mortality and morbidity. So we did make sure that we could discuss that and also capture some of the new guidelines recommendation that now recommends cotrimoxazole to be used in all children living with HIV.
Thank you. And the next question is from Narmada of UNAIDS in Zambia. When Spectrum is revised, it is difficult to compare the progress on some indicators at country level. This also creates some sort of frustration among partners. How can we handle this issue?
So I think we've always had this problem. I mean, it's a challenge between the science and improving the models and improving our understanding and the communications of those changed results. And so the first thing always to take home is that when we update our estimates, we update the whole series of estimates. So you have PMTCT coverage from 2009, from 2010, 11, 12, etc. You also have, I mean, especially with the new child estimates, you don't want to compare to the 2014 estimates. You want to say, okay, here's what I have. This is my estimated children living with HIV in 2015, and use that same model to compare the historical numbers as well. So it's just being very careful and then recognizing and trying to explain, just as I'm doing right here, trying to explain to our partners and to managers, program managers, why the new estimates are better. Why do we think that we should be using these new estimates over the previous ones? And that's difficult because it tends to be fairly technical. But you know, from this presentation, there's two messages to take home. One is a better understanding of the probability of transmitting to the mother, from the mother to the child, which we overestimated in the past. Our new science says that it should be lower. The second thing is that we have better data on when children start on ART. So those two items are what you need to kind of use as your messaging to explain the new estimates.
Thank you, Mary, for giving us those two key takeaway messages. I think that was very helpful. And the next question is from Abdulhamid Ishak. How do you define mothers needing PMTCT? Does this include CD4 cutoff points?
No, so any woman who's living with HIV and who's pregnant needs PMTCT. So there's no CD4 question involved. We do recognize that women with different CD4 will have different different transmission probabilities, but we do not. We assume all women require PMTCT.
Martina, do you want to add anything?
No, that's exactly what we recommend.
Next question is from Etienne Kembu of WHO Cameroon. How can you explain that child ART coverage is similar to that of adults? I know, Mary, you touched on this in your presentation, but as you pointed to, I think that this is probably the change that will cause the most pause for many people. So if you want to add to anything you already mentioned.
I don't have anything to add. I think it was pretty much covered, but I mean, I just think that we think that the models are much more accurate, and that changes the denominator of ART coverage for children. And you know, what we need is better data against which to validate the models. So you know, we need better measures of HIV prevalence in children at smaller age groups, and that's exactly what the person who commented on the search data coming out of Kenya. That's the type of data that we need to validate this. But I think it's, you know, there's nothing to say that there's no good evidence to say that the previous estimates of very low coverage were right. And what we're hearing anecdotally was that program partners weren't able to find these children no matter how much they went out and tried to search for the HIV child that wasn't getting treatment. So we think we're probably more correct, but more validation is always welcome.
And Jessica, if I can chime in, I just want to remember people that the coverage is calculated based on real data coming from countries on the numerator, so the total number of children that are on ART that are reported by countries, and that the denominator is estimated through the model. So, and I think just sometimes that's something that for some people it's obvious, for others it's less. So I just wanted to remind that.
Thank you, Martina. We have a few more questions. The next is more so a comment. Christine from Zimbabwe is noting that the significant drop in the total number of children living with HIV and the increased coverage of pediatric ART in the 2015 estimates is likely to result in overstocking of pediatric ARVs. given that the 2014 estimates were much higher. So this poses a lot of challenges at the country level. Martina or Mary, do you want to comment on that or respond?
Yeah, I think, Christine, the point you're making, it's really good. I think it does help us to reflect on some of the programmatic implications of these numbers. But I do think that these specific issues might not be an issue everywhere, particularly if we recognize that pediatric programs haven't really scaled up as much as we wanted. And if countries are now shifting towards treating all children living with HIV, which we know is largely the direction that everyone is taking, then, you know, at this point in time, we are not necessarily worried about, you know, overstocking drugs. I think things might be slightly different in countries where IATT has been operating over the past 2 years, and I don't know if George or others wants to comment on that, but again, I don't expect that to be an issue in all countries, because we're really hoping that more children will be started on treatment, and so that you can use actually those drugs you have there in the country.
Okay, and I welcome anyone from the audience as well to join in and provide any further comments on this issue as well. The next question is from Joyce of UNICEF. We saw a reduction in the number of new HIV infections among women perinatally for almost all categories of ART regimen, essentially between 2015 and 2016. But an increase in those initiated on ART based on the 2016 estimates. Why is this the case?
So I'm not sure that I understand this question, and I'm not sure, Jessica, if you can open this up for Joyce to expand, but when she's talking about what she saw, is that data from, first of all, are the new infections among children or new infections among women? And then secondly, what is the data source that she's talking about here?
No. Can I come in,
Sure.
Jessica?
Yes, please.
I think there was a slide which had several graphs on it you presented in your slides. And the first one had graphs showing new infections in children. If you go back. No, yeah, go back. No, it's after this. Go forward, please. So it was showing the estimates. There were several of them, several graphs, and you quickly went through it.
Was it you? Was it Martinez or
no, yes. Go forward.
I think there is a little bit of delay, so wait.
Where did I see this?
Go
forward. Go forward. Can you go forward? Where is this slide? But I don't know. But it was showing in terms of based on the assumptions that you have actually put in. There was a change if for women that were initiated. This one.
Okay.
Yeah, you see peripartum transmission rates. If you look at the rest, it's going up for 2016. But look at the ART during pregnancy. For 2016, it's doubled. You get what I'm trying to say?
So these are probabilities of transmission, and these are kind of inputs into the model. They're not the results necessarily. And so what it's saying, it's saying that we misunderstood the probability in 2015 to be too low versus 2016 to be slightly higher. And I can speak to that exactly. It's the PROMISE study that came out that actually showed it was a little bit higher than what we had initially, well, it was multiple studies. I shouldn't just say it's PROMISE study. But so that's just saying that the probability of transmission is actually higher than what we initially thought when women started ART during pregnancy.
But then that's where my question was. If the probability is higher than the previous, and yet the results are showing us that the numbers are lower than the previous estimates, how do you link the two?
It's because the other items that are circled in red had a much more important impact on. Historically, there were many more incident infections than there were women who started on ART during the pregnancy. So that's going to have an impact on it. Plus, there's, again, historically, a lot more women had single-dose nevirapine especially through the late 2000s, and so those have a bigger impact than the number who are currently started on ART during pregnancy in the models.
Okay.
Okay. Thank you, Mary, for clarifying that for Joyce. The next question is, if there is an estimated 60% of new infections coming from the breastfeeding period, couldn't the lack of clear data on adherence in that period make a significant difference in the estimate of children living with HIV, and therefore the coverage, ART coverage among children?
Yes, and so that's one of the reasons I kept that, even though we didn't make that change. I want to make sure people are aware that there's still more that we need, and a lot of it depends on what data we can get from countries to inform those models. But I mean, we do think that we potentially have underestimated the new infections, which might mean that there's more infections. I mean, I don't want to bring up questions, but there's more out there. We'll continue to learn and we'll continue to improve our models.
And I think that, as Mary mentioned earlier, we're hoping that the IATT working group might help on this and gathering some of the programmatic data and also sort of relook at them more critically so that we can, if anything, develop a default parameter and a value, that could be used for countries that, still don't have that information, but at least we would base that on a few countries that have been able to collect that.
Thank you. A couple more questions before we wrap up. The next set of questions are from George Siberi from the National Institute of Health. And he says lower estimates of children living with HIV come from the model accounting for fewer infant infections, or as a result of better PMT-CT performance, and lower survival because of later ART initiation. Can you estimate the relative contribution of these two major factors to the overall reduction in the number of children living with HIV? And then his second question is, can you expand upon the substantial reduction in the estimated risk of transmission after incident HIV during pregnancy? I think after incident HIV infection during pregnancy.
So I think from the change in the probabilities, the transmission probabilities, we estimate about a 30% reduction. The change from the ART data is about a 10% increase, but it's not necessarily relative. And so I might need to go back and redo that calculation for you. Those were kind of two separate pieces that I pulled out and calculated the percent change or the rough estimate of the change, but it's not necessarily relative. The second point from George, substantial reduction in the transmission after incident HIV during pregnancy. I see Lynn Muffinson's on the phone here. Lynn was kind enough to do this analysis for us. And there's a number of studies that went into that, and we could share some of that, which of those studies those were, or Lynn could speak up now if she'd like to put some input into that.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
You can, okay. So I'm sorry, I was actually a little fixated on the data for the antiretroviral start during pregnancy because that doesn't look consistent with what we discussed. I thought that the start during pregnancy was about 2% in the 215 model, and that the data suggested that starting during pregnancy was associated with a lower risk. Of the PROMISE study showed 0.6. So I'm a little confused on those bars in that particular graph.
So let me come back, or let me answer that, and then we'll come back to George's question about the incident infections. And so, Lynn, the change there was you had two estimates. One was for children who are breastfed, and the other one was for children who are not breastfed. And we have gone with the option of the children who are breastfed, since the vast majority of children in our models are breastfeeding children. So we can come back to that if you'd like. We can discuss that later, but that was our final conclusion, to use that value. if you're okay with that, then the question that was posed to you was, can you give us a little bit more insight into the studies that were added that reduce the probability among the incident infections? And if, I don't know, we're kind of putting you on the spot there, so we're also happy to send George, the names of those studies, if that would be better.
George, it was really there was the Drake meta-analysis, and in that meta-analysis, the rates with incident infection were lower than had been previously reported in smaller case reports. So I think that's primarily what drove the lowering of the transmission rate during incident pregnancy. I can send that to you if you want. I'm still confused though, Mary, regarding the data on the 215 guidelines on antiretroviral start during pregnancy, because I would think that it would be higher.
No, 2015, we initially went out with 2.0, and then at CROI, I think it was, the PROMISE study came out, and so we went back and changed it to 0.95 during the workshops, and so I believe the 0.95 was what was actually used by countries in their transmission probability in 2015.
Okay, and that was accounting for 18 months of breastfeeding or whatever.
That's just at the point of 6 weeks.
But then the 216 model is including breastfeeding?
No. So from the graphic there, you can see peripartum and then postpartum. And so this 0.95 was the 2015 model estimate for probability for just till 6 weeks. And then the 1.9 was also just till 6 weeks as we had understood it for among breastfeeding populations though. And even though those women might not continue to breastfeed, we assume that transmission, that peripartum transmission is higher.
Okay, well maybe we can communicate about it later because I'm still confused, but that's okay.
Okay, that's great. And again, great work from Lynn's side on this analysis, and I think we're okay with that. But if we've confused any of your analysis, that's our fault, and let's discuss it.
Okay.
Thank you all for the discussion and the clarifications. One last question, I believe, from Stuart Keene, and that is a World Vision. What are the median ages of initiation of cotrimoxazole and ART, and do these vary by region? So again, I'm not sure, Mary, if this can be discussed at this time or if we wait until tomorrow, but if you have any response to Stuart's question.
So I can give you quick responses. So we don't have cotrimoxazole by age necessarily captured in the model. What we do is we capture if the child is on ART and cotrimoxazole, the mortality is reduced. We do have the ART median age of initiation, and keep in mind that starting on ART is a distribution by single year age group. So when we're doing a median, it's very much a simplification of the full amount of data that goes into the model. Those data will be different for each country. And so while I showed you a rough line, I believe, in the graphic here, median age at ART initiation, that's for Africa. That's a really rough, that was some of the assumptions that went into the model, but this will change by each country based on the proportion of children on ART and the distribution of children in that country. So again, that would be a country-specific response, which we could provide, or we could aggregate it together and provide you kind of information by regions as needed. But it would be a further step, is my point.
Thank you so much. So if there are no further questions or comments, I'd like to take the time to express our gratitude for Mary Mehi and Martina Pinizzato for joining us and giving us a really thorough and comprehensive overview of the 2016 Pediatric HIV Modeling and Estimates. And if you have any further questions, especially as the data is released tomorrow, feel free to send them through to us and we'll forward them and ensure that they are responded to. And we're also very glad to see that this forum is also useful to hear from countries about potential suggestions and recommendations as well for improving the models. And as Mary and Martina mentioned earlier in the presentation, if you have any insights or ideas on obtaining programmatic data that could be incorporated into the model, please feel free to share that with us. And so I'll turn it over to Mary and Martina for any last comments before we close the webinar.
Jessica, thanks again for the opportunity to discuss really this topic, which we've worked for some time now, and we are very happy to have more opportunity for interaction and to further discuss this with different people that might be interested. I think both Mary and I were quite keen to have this webinar because we think that it's very helpful to also have a better understanding what the numbers that we often use and cite and see everywhere mean. And we hope that this webinar has helped you to understand that a little bit better. And whenever you look and you read some of the papers that are out, you just put that into the context of how those estimates are developed and what the challenges and uncertainties are. So thank you again, Mary.
Just from my side, I just wanted to emphasize the question that was asked about the need for using these data at the country level and how it can be confusing, and we're here to support you with that. It's not easy at the global level or the country level, but we do think we're moving in the right direction and making vast improvements in our estimates. So please let us know when we can help you. The data is really for country purposes and country use, and so anything we can do to support you, we're here for you. And thanks again to UNICEF and WHO for organizing.
Thank you very much. And lastly, before we close, we have a couple of webinars coming up. One on February 13th, which will be in French and targeting Francophone countries, and it will be about the 2015 WHO guidelines. So we are excited about that. And we have another webinar on June 21st regarding the WHO and UNICEF HIV and infant feeding guidelines. So we hope you can join us and spread the word. Thank you all for making the time to participate in the webinar this morning, and we look forward to hearing from you online. Thank you, everyone.